Well, I think we've seen that Iran has demonstrated both the willingness and capability to strike out at not just US and Israeli interests in the region, but also to some key partners throughout the Gulf and even beyond in the Arab world. So the expectation here would be if the United States was going to re-engage in some of these more limited strikes against Iranian targets, that the IRGC and the Iranian regime itself would order targets across a spectrum of key partners and allies in the region. Towards what end remains to be seen, but we're entering a phase here that appears to be more inclined towards using some of these attacks as a means of more coercive diplomacy as the diplomatic talks have stalled.
So the Islamabad MOU committed Iran to safe passage through the strait. Has Washington effectively torn up the agreement it signed just weeks ago?
Well, I think Trump's messaging is designed to convey that and at least threaten that in the hopes that Iran will change its behavior. But it's important to point out too that with the MOU, you had a number of points that were listed in fairly general language, open to interpretation from both sides, and without really guidance on the sequencing of when each of these points was going to be implemented. So right now, I think Iran appears to be upset with the lack of some of the economic incentives in the MOU, and is using its continuing influence over the Strait of Hormuz as a pressure point for the Trump administration.
Since quite a lot of time we're already seeing prices jump, how sustained could this shock be if Hormuz becomes a live fire zone again?
Yeah, I think what we've seen in the oil markets is largely a lot of sensitivity on the days when there are either spikes in violence or announcements that suggest that the violence is over. I don't want to speculate too much on where these prices may or may not go, but right now I think if we're going to remain in this period of, again, tit for tat, limited strikes between Iran and the United States, it's safe to say that oil prices will remain elevated.
Okay, also Trump signaled out Spain by name, calling it a wasted cause, a terrible partner, and threatening to cut off all trade. How seriously should Madrid and the rest of the NATO take a threat like that?
Yeah, once again, I mean, Trump has demonstrated in these last few months that he is willing to use a very threatening rhetoric against not just enemies like Iran that he is now twice at least threatened to eliminate, but with some of these allies and partners that he feels have not been not only as reactive to his requests for their involvement, but also to some of their criticism about the war itself. And Spain, Spanish leadership has been more outspoken in criticizing Trump for getting into this war. And I think we're seeing that play out here in Trump's rhetoric, although I will say it seems that, based on the recent remarks Trump made from Ankara, that this NATO summit did go reasonably well. He did have critical words, obviously, for Spain, but they weren't quite as biting as they have been in the recent days.
Sir, last but not the least, if this ceasefire fully collapses, let's say, what's the likeliest next flashpoint?
Yeah, look, I think the way we've come to use the word ceasefire in the past few months, I think begs for a new definition. Right now, the fact that you have ongoing, again, if limited, attacks against both sides, perpetrated by both sides, you do have a ceasefire that has effectively collapsed. I think the better way to think about this is that until the United States and Iran demonstrate that they have an agenda that is, if not prioritized, then at least list the large issues at a strategic level that both sides are willing to sit down and discuss, I think we should expect this sort of gray area between neither peace nor war for the foreseeable future. Because right now, I don't think either side is going to resort back to what we would refer to as an all-out war, or certainly what we saw in the opening weeks back in March and April of this year. But I do think that both sides are motivated to continue to use violence as a means of achieving its goals, particularly given that both sides have very different priorities right now.